place. So, all right, this morning we're going to get into one of the passages that strikes at the very heart of Christianity. In fact, I would argue that if you wanted to find, you couldn't find a more fundamental passage when you're asking the question, what does it mean to be a Christian? What does it mean to follow Jesus? What does it mean to be a disciple? So much so that when we were picking a verse for this series to put on the wall in the foyer, this is the passage we picked. That's what we're coming to today. And so, if you would, open up with me to Luke chapter 9. That's where we're going to be. We don't come to this passage and we don't spend time on it because it's confusing. It's actually fairly straightforward. You don't need me or anybody else to explain it. It will make sense. But we come to this passage because it sort of goes against everything our culture values. And more than that, it goes against everything that our natural hearts desire. And so that's why we need to spend time here. That's why I entitled the message today, The Paradox of Discipleship. And so I think you'll see that as we get into this. But before we go any further, let's just read Luke 9, 18 to 25. I'll read it. Once, when Jesus was praying in private, and his disciples were with him, he asked them, "Who do the crowds say that I am?" They answered, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, still others that one of the prophets of long ago has come back to life." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Peter answered, "God's Messiah." Jesus strictly warned them not to tell this to anyone. And he said, "The Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the teachers of the law, and he must be killed, and on the third day be raised to life." Then he said to them all, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross daily, and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it. For what good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet lose and forfeit their very self?" This passage deals with three questions, three very essential, core, kind of fundamental questions. Here they are. Who is Jesus? What does following Jesus entail, and is it worth it? Pretty basic, sort of core questions. And so, just as relevant today for us following Jesus as they were back for Jesus' original hearers. So let's start with the first one. Who is Jesus? Now, this question about Jesus' identity has been sort of building as you go through the book of Luke. If you just start Luke chapter 1 and start reading, this topic of his identity comes up over and over and over again. We've seen some of them as we've been going through. It shows up the first time when Jesus preaches his first sermon in his hometown. He preaches on Isaiah 61. At the end of that message, he says, this passage has been fulfilled in me and my ministry. And everyone's like, who is this? Isn't this Joseph's son? First time it comes up. Then it comes up again a couple chapters later in Luke 7. We referenced it last week. There's a funeral going on, and Jesus says, no, we're not having a funeral today. We're having a homecoming today. And he raises this son back to life and gives him back to his mother. And the crowd standing there are like, who is this? This is one of the prophets of old. Go to the next chapter, chapter 8. Jesus and his friends are in a boat in the middle of a storm. And these are professional fishermen who are afraid they're about to die. And so they wake Jesus up, they're scared, and then Jesus just tells the storm to knock it off. And it becomes perfectly calm. And so what was once an external sort of physical storm now becomes this internal storm in their hearts. Who is this? That even the winds and the waves obey him. Now, the last time this comes up is earlier in Luke chapter 9. Herod, the tetrarch that we talked about last week, the one who put John in prison, he's wondering now about Jesus. And so he asks people, who is this Jesus? And they give him a variety of answers. Some say Elijah, some say John the Baptist, some say a prophet. And Herod's perplexed. He doesn't know. Except he knows it's not John because he beheaded him. There's this, it's sort of been building through the book of Luke. And it's really interesting because as the readers, we already know who Jesus is because there's the narration from chapters 1 and 2, the prophecies about who Jesus is. But the people in the stories, they don't know. And so we're sort of watching them struggle with this. You know, there's just as much confusion about who Jesus is today as there was back then. Think of the average person you work with or someone in your extended family. Most people think Jesus is just some good moral teacher. You know, not that much different than Gandhi or Confucius or Muhammad or something like that. Oh, it was Jesus' followers who came along and deified him, who made him more than he ever claimed to be. No, Jesus just taught people to love people. And because Jesus is sort of on the same playing field with all these other moral teachers, we should really tolerate and sort of listen to all of them. That's the popular sort of thinking about Jesus. There's nothing unique, there's nothing special about him. So one day, Jesus is praying, and he decides to sort of poll his audience. Who do people say that I am? Look at verse 19 and 20 again. They replied, some say John the Baptist, other Elijah, still others, one of the prophets long ago come back to life. They're just reporting to Jesus what's sort of popular, what people around them are saying. But then Jesus takes the question to a whole different level. He looks straight at his closest followers and says, all right, but who do you say that I am? And Peter answers, God's Messiah. Peter gets it right. Everything Jesus has been doing and saying up to this point, all of the healings, all of the miracles, all of his teaching, has been trying to convince his followers that he is the Messiah, and now they get it. The word used here is the word Christos, what we would say Christ. But that's not Jesus' last name. That means Messiah. He is this king to end all kings. And not only that, he's going to be the king that's going to set up his kingdom forever. He's going to end all oppression and corruption and violence. That is all wrapped up in what Peter says when he says, you're the Messiah. And so there's two parts of Jesus' identity that come up here. The first is that he's the king. And he's not just one among prophets. He's not just another moral teacher in a long string of moral teachers. No, he's not just a king among other kings. He is the king, totally unique. He is the Messiah, the Christ. Now, if you're a teacher and you're teaching your class, and you've been teaching as best you can, and now it's quiz time. You need to try to assess, do they get it? And so you give a little verbal quiz, and they give you the right answer. What do you think your response would be? You would expect some sort of affirmation. Well, look what Jesus says. Verse 21. Jesus strictly warned them not to tell this to anyone. Don't tell anyone. I mean, I thought Jesus was going to say, you did it, now shout it from the rooftops. You got it right. Way to go. But he doesn't. He acknowledges they have it right, but he's saying, you don't yet have the right idea. Okay, you know who I am, but you don't have the idea of what I'm going to do, so don't open your mouth yet. Jesus tells them what's coming. He says 4 things. Look at the next verse. He says, the Son of Man must suffer many things, must be rejected by the elders and the chief priests, teachers of the law. He must be killed, and on the 3rd day be raised to life. This would have completely shocked his disciples. Ever since they sat on their mother's knee, they have been hearing about what the Messiah would do. Their entire lives, they've been waiting for the Messiah. The nation as a whole has been waiting for centuries for this Messiah. You know, this is the place in the other accounts of this story where Peter stands up, takes Jesus aside, and rebukes Jesus. I mean, talk about a type A personality. He has just self-declared him as the King of Kings, and now he's going to try to straighten him out a little bit. No one expected a Messiah who would suffer. No one. They thought the Messiah had this direct route to glory. That this Messiah would crush corruption and oppression and violence. And Jesus says, no. To end corruption, oppression, and violence, I have to be crushed. And Jesus, he uses a really strong word. He says the Son of Man must suffer. It's a little Greek word, 3 letters. Jesus isn't just saying this is what's going to happen. He is saying this must happen. This is the way it has to be for me to deal with the corruption that's in the world and the corruption that's in you and me. Now, we could spend a long time talking about all the reasons Jesus had to die. But that's a message for another time. For today, we can suffice it to say that without Jesus' death, we could not be reconciled to God. He died in our place. And so the second piece of Jesus' identity is not only is he the king, but he's a king with a cross. Now think about how important that identity is, especially as we start talking about the next question of, well, let's talk about how we follow him. If Jesus is a king, then of course we need to submit to him. That's what kings do. They force subjects to submit to them. So yeah, Jesus could force us to submit because he's the king. But he doesn't do that. He's the king with a cross. So no, we are not forced to submit. We get to submit. Anyone who loves us that much that they went to a cross for us and on our behalf, we willingly submit to a person like that. We are glad we get to submit to a person like that. So let's go to that next question. Well, what does following Jesus entail? Jesus not only is going to describe his own future, he's now going to describe what it's going to look like if you follow him. If you're his follower. He has three different things he mentions. Look at verse 23. Then he said to them all, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross daily, and follow me." Jesus says, this is how you relate to me. This is how you can be connected to me, how you follow me, what it looks like to be my disciple. They're all just ways of saying the same thing. We don't come to Jesus on our terms. We come to Jesus on his terms. And here are the terms he lays out. He said, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves." You know, the word deny, if you look it up, it means to disavow any connection with something. Or it means to state that you are not connected in any way with whatever's in view. You know where else this word shows up? Deny. Remember when Peter, when Jesus is on trial, he's warming his hands by a fire, and a little girl comes up and says, "Hey, you were with Jesus." It says Peter denied Jesus. In fact, it says he didn't even know him, and he affirmed it with curses and oaths. That's the exact same word Jesus uses here. Let's make an important distinction to make sure we know what we're not talking about. When this says to deny yourself, this does not mean self-denial. And by that I mean, think of like giving something up. Maybe what Christians often do around Lent, where they pick something like chocolate or coffee and they decide to not partake in that for the month of Lent. That's not what this is talking about. This is maybe when you think of self-denial, you think of certain kinds of diets, like the Whole30 or something. I spent a whole 30 seconds thinking about doing the Whole30. But if you've known anyone who's done that, they are constantly self-denial, right? All these other kinds of foods they're staying away from, and they're partaking only in certain ones. Jesus is never as much concerned with what we do as with what we are. And because of that, he's not talking about giving up luxuries. He's not talking about giving up necessities. No, he's talking about denying self, which is very different. Denying self means to disown, to sort of cast off our natural feelings about ourselves. That is our right to ourselves, our right to run our own lives. We are to deny that we own ourselves. That's what he's talking about. That we have the final right to decide about what we're going to do. You see how fundamental this is? This strikes at the heart of our existence. Because one of the things as human beings that we sort of value and we covet and we hold on to, we protect, is our right to make ultimate decisions about our own life. We refuse to be under anyone or anything. But we sort of reserve the right to make the final decisions about our life. But that's what Jesus is talking about. He's not talking about giving up this or that. He's talking about giving up ourselves. That's the kind of followers Jesus wants. The Apostle Paul says it very similarly in 1 Corinthians 6. He says, "You are not your own. You've been bought at a price." So when we follow Jesus, we no longer own ourselves. He has ultimate rights. He has lordship over our lives. We no longer belong to ourselves. He makes those final decisions. That's what he means by deny yourself. Deny self-trust, deny self-sufficiency, feeling that we're able to sort of handle life by ourselves and run life to sort of suit ourselves. I read an article a while back called The Art of Being a Big Shot. It was written by a Christian businessman, but one paragraph in there sort of paralleled what Jesus is saying here. Listen to this. He says, "It is my pride that makes me independent of God. It's appealing to me to feel that I am the master of my fate, that I run my own life. I call my own shots. I go it alone. But that feeling is my basic dishonesty. I can't go it alone. I have to get help from other people. I can't ultimately rely on myself. I'm dependent on God for my very next breath. It is dishonest of me to pretend that I'm anything but a man, small, weak, and limited." So living independent of God is self-delusion. It's just not a matter of pride being an unfortunate little trait and humility being an attractive little virtue. It is my inner psychological integrity that is at stake. When I am conceited, I am lying to myself about who I am. I'm pretending to be God and not man. My pride is the idolatrous worship of myself. And that is the national religion of hell. Which is why to follow Jesus, the self is the first thing that has to go. Jesus says, you want to follow me, the first step is to give up your rights to yourself. To submit to his leadership, to his lordship. That is fundamental to all discipleship. There is no discipleship without that. I mentioned a few weeks ago, I'm listening to Dietrich Bonhoeffer's Cost of Discipleship, and he comments on this verse that Jesus says to deny yourself, and here's what he says. He says, self-denial is never just a series of isolated acts of mortification, meaning sort of the putting to death of the sinful nature. Nor is it just asceticism, withdrawing, sort of living a hermit-like life. He says, no, to deny yourself is to be aware only of Christ and no longer of self. To see only him who goes before and no more of the road which is too hard for us. Once more, all that self-denial can say is, he leads the way. Keep close to him. That's what self-denial is. Taking our eyes completely off of ourselves, putting them onto him and saying, you're the center of my attention. You're the center of my life. You've probably heard the illustration about driving a car, and that only one person can drive the car of your life. Self-denial means getting out of the seat and letting Jesus drive the car of your life. But what struck me is how different this is from sort of nominal Christianity that exists everywhere around us, especially here in the Bible Belt. Think of that car, but think of the nominal Christian in our culture. For a cultural Christian, they want to have lots of people in the car with them, right? They want to have maybe their financial advisor, maybe their life coach, maybe they want their yoga instructor, maybe their parent. Oh, sure, Jesus, we want you in the car too. But notice who's still driving the car. They are. Jesus has been sort of reduced to one of these moral teachers. Sure, we want Jesus in our life too, but we're still in control. We're still driving the car in that case. Jesus is just one of the voices. But that's not what it looks like to follow Jesus. Sure, that kind of person might call themselves a Christian, but they're not relating to Jesus as king with a cross. To do that, we get out of the seat. We say, I'm yours now. You lead, you direct. The second step, after denying ourselves, comes right next. It says, must take up their cross daily. Now, what does it mean to take up your cross? You'll hear all sorts of crazy ideas about what this means. Take up my cross, maybe like it's your mother-in-law. Like that could be not my mother-in-law in case you're listening someday. Some people might say that. You could say, oh, my boss, that's my cross. Or, I've got a leaky faucet, that's my cross. This is not what Jesus means. And Jesus himself had many trials. He had many hardships before he came to his cross. No, for Jesus, the cross was something very different. The cross stood for something in the life of Jesus that was connected to shame, was connected to humiliation. The cross was a place of degradation where he was debased and demeaned. So the cross stands forever as a symbol of those circumstances and events in our life that offend us, that expose us, that bring us shame, that reveal sort of the junk inside of us, the sin of the old person who's still there. And Jesus says when those experiences come, we're to welcome them. That's what he means by take up your cross. To willingly accept those situations, to glory in it, to cling to those because they are actually good for us. Those experiences will reduce us to a place where we are ready to receive the grace of God. That's why the cross is so valuable to us. And this doesn't just mean the big things in life. This can be very small things as well. For example, and all of these happened actually this week for me. Do you feel hurt when someone forgets your name? Do you get upset when you're passed over for an opportunity? Does criticism hurt even when you know it's justified? Does it get under your skin when you lose at anything? Lost at softball and Old Maid this week. Jesus tells us to take up our cross, to welcome these events. And this is a radical approach to life. I mean, think of how different this is than the world around us. How does the world around us tell us to respond to these sort of situations that expose us, that offend us, that shame us? The world says, reject those. Run away from them. Avoid them at all costs. And if you can't avoid them, then get angry. Get even. Offend right back. Get upset. But Jesus says, if you're going to be my disciple, now you deny yourself and you take up your cross. You accept it. Look what a hymn writer writes. We don't sing this hymn. Maybe we should. Must Jesus bear the cross alone and all the world go free? No, there's a cross for everyone. There's a cross for me. The consecrated cross I'll bear till death shall set me free, and then go home my crown to wear, for there's a crown for me. The disciples, they thought Jesus had a direct route to glory. And they thought they, by extension, also had a direct route to glory. And Jesus says, no, I have a cross coming, and so do you. The way to glory is down. Jesus is not a very good salesman, is he? He's not saying, hey, 4 easy payments of $19.99 and you can follow me. No, this is serious. This is solemn. It's not terribly appealing. But no one can ever accuse Jesus of not being honest about what it costs to be his follower, of what's involved. He says, come on the journey with me, but if you do, it's going to shatter you. It is going to change you. It is going to make you into a different kind of person. There's one more step. Verse 23. You must deny yourself, take up your cross daily, and follow me. Follow me is simply a call to obedience. To follow somebody is to do what they say. I mean, think about it. If you follow what your doctor says, then you do the prescribed course that they put you on to get better. If you follow your physical therapist, then you actually do the stretches and the exercises that they're asking you to do. Following means obeying. Our will is out, his will is in. We pattern our lives around how he tells us to live. Now we struggle with this. I mean, I fail at this all the time. Jesus is not talking about perfection here. He's simply telling us what discipleship means, what's involved with it. It means choosing to do or say what Jesus commands us to do or say, as he himself did. But this is not in our own strength. No, we look to him for the power to do it. That's what it meant for Jesus' first disciples. They obeyed him, and they looked to him for the power to do what he asked. Think of the story of feeding the 5,000. Jesus said, go feed the crowd. But then he had to supply what they needed to do what he asked them to do. That's what Christianity is all about. It's about following him. When Jesus says things like, love your enemies and pray for those who hurt you and forgive those who offend you. These aren't just like kind words, helpful like truisms. This is Jesus setting in front of us a way to live. And so we choose to obey in his strength. Now, obedience can sound like kind of a negative word, especially depending on what kind of context you grew up in. But this is where we have to go back to the identity of Jesus. If Jesus is just the king demanding obedience, then maybe it could be negative. But when Jesus is a king with a cross who has forever proven his love for us, to ask us to obey to him is the most loving and kind thing he could ask us to do. He's won our hearts with his love, and so we gladly obey. Jesus himself forever linked love and obedience. And whenever I think of those two, I think of John 14:21. Whoever has my commands and keeps them is the one who loves me. Love and obedience. The one who loves me will be loved by my Father, and I too will love them and show myself to them. So if you come from a context where obedience is sort of a negative word, then just think of it as love in action, because that's how Jesus wants us to respond to him. Now, all three of these steps, deny yourself, take up your cross daily, follow me, they're all in the present continuous tense in the Greek, which means keep on. Keep on denying yourself, keep on taking on your cross, keep on following me. And this isn't a decision for the moment, this is a posture for a lifetime. And even, you can go to the next slide, Luke even records Jesus saying the word daily. Now, I looked up the word daily in the Greek, and you know what it means? It means every day. I was thinking, hey, look up daily. Oh, in the Greek, in daily, it really means about once a year. You got to do these things. About once a month. No, every day. Discipleship is denying your rights to yourself. It's taking up your cross. It's accepting those circumstances that come that expose our pride, our conceit. And it's following Jesus. Doing what he says in the power that he gives us to do it. Now, there's a Puritan prayer. I think I put this on the slide. That really captures the paradoxical nature of all of this. It says, Lord, high and holy, meek and lowly, let me learn by paradox, maybe I don't have this up there, that the way up is the way down, that the way low is to be high, that the broken heart is the healed heart, that the contrite spirit is the rejoicing spirit, that the repenting soul is the victorious soul, that to have nothing is to possess everything, that to bear the cross is to wear the crown, that to give is to receive. Let me find thy light in my darkness, thy joy in my sorrow, thy grace in my sin, thy riches in my poverty, thy glory in my valley, thy life in my death. It is. It's paradoxical. And this is how Jesus invites us to follow him. Now, who would ever choose that? And the answer is no one. Unless the Spirit of God works inside of us to draw us to him. None of us choose this, but the Spirit opens our eyes to the beauty of Jesus. Now, Jesus ends this passage with two soul-searching questions that answer the question, is it worth it? When you hear that call of Jesus, that the call is really to go down, is that worth it? And look at Jesus' response. We'll only have time to look at one of these questions. He says, for whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it. Now, who is not interested in saving their life? Meaning, making it worthwhile. Making it complete and full and rich and actually worth the living. We all want that. Deep down, every single one of us has a hunger and a desire to sort of get the most out of life. To live life to the full extent as it was designed to be. That's what Jesus is talking about. If you want that, Jesus says, I'll tell you how to get it. And he says there's only two approaches to life. You can save your life, meaning you can sort of cling to it. You can hoard it. You can clutch it. You can grasp it. You can try to hold on to it for yourself. You can trust yourself. See that in every situation, your first and your major concern is, what am I going to get out of this? That's one way to live. And millions are living like that. And all of us live like that at one time or another. The other approach is to lose your life. To fling it away. To disregard it. To move out in dependence on God, not caring what happens to you. There's only two approaches to life, and there's only two results. If you try to save your life, if you sort of cling to it, if you clutch it, if all you care about is yourself, then without a doubt, Jesus says, you will lose it. And this is not just some truism. Jesus is saying this is a fundamental law of life. It's absolutely unbreakable. Nobody can break this. If you save your life, Jesus says, you will lose it. You will find that you have everything you want, but nothing of anything that you have. You'll find that the life that you've tried to grasp has slipped through your fingers. All you have is cobwebs instead. Now, Jesus is right, of course, but it often doesn't seem like that, does it? Most of us, we look enviously at those who we think have arrived, at those who have made it. We think, man, they've got everything they want. They don't have any problems. That's what living really is. And on the surface, maybe, but if you actually talk to people who are at the top, people who have made it, and then you press them a little bit about deeper things like satisfaction and about contentment and fulfillment, you'll find it's just not there. Let me give you an illustration of this. I kind of like to collect illustrations about this because it's so tempting to think, oh, those who are rich and famous, they have the real life. Billy Joel, he's a great artist. I really like Billy Joel. Listen to him all the time. He's certainly somebody who's made it to the top. Let me just give you a few of his accomplishments. He was Male Artist of the Year. He had the Record of the Year, Song of the Year, Album of the Year. During the 80s, he had 20 songs make it into the top 40, 9 of which made it into the top 10. In 1999, he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He made it to the top, but did he find satisfaction? And look at what he says. He says, the happiest times in my life were when my relationships were going well. But in my whole life, I haven't yet met a person that I can sustain a relationship with. So I'm discontented about that. I'm angry with myself. I have regrets. You don't get hugged by the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Cynthia Hemmel, she writes for the Village Voice. She lives in New York City, and she writes about celebrities. And listen to what she writes. She's not a Christian that I know of, but this is what she observes about celebrities. She says, I pity celebrities. No, I do. Celebrities were once perfectly pleasant human beings. But now their wrath is awful. More than any of us, they wanted fame, they worked, they pushed. The morning after, each of them became famous, they wanted to take an overdose. Because that giant thing they were striving for, that fame thing that was going to make everything okay, that was going to make their lives bearable, that was going to provide them with personal fulfillment and happiness, it had happened and nothing changed. They were still them. The disillusionment turned them howling and insufferable. And her last line is just chilling here. I think when God wants to play a really rotten practical joke on you, he grants you your deepest wish. Jesus says, save your life and you will lose it. But there's a different path. Jesus says, lose your life. Lose it by giving yourself away for the cause of Christ. By giving up your rights to yourself, by taking up your cross daily, by following and obeying the way he told us to live, you won't waste it. No, you will save it. You will find contentment. You'll find satisfaction. You'll find inner peace. You'll find a sense of worth. And what you'll discover, not just in heaven someday, but even now, in the living of life now, that although you don't have what everybody else might have, your life is rich, your life is rewarding, and it's satisfying. You will find your life. In other words, Jesus is saying, it's worth it. The disciples thought they were on sort of direct route to glory, and Jesus said, no, we're going to turn all of that upside down. You have the right idea. You know who I am, but I'm taking you on a whole different road. We're going down. The route to glory is through the cross. And you're coming with me, and it's the only way to a meaningful and satisfying life that glorifies God. Let me pray for us.